We are very excited about this. So we have Mitzi Jonelle Tan. She's Fridays from Future from the Philippines. We have Xiye Bastida, Fridays from Future, Mexico, US. And Pheobe Hanson, Teach for the Future, UK, who participated in in one of our COP events back when COVID was still raging all around us. So these three activists have each been leading campaigns for climate justice. We will hear from them, and then we will have a time for questions and answers. Please don't be shy. You can share your questions in the chat or ask them as part of our discussion. So to our dear panelists, we will start. If each of you could briefly introduce yourselves, how you see this, and talk about your experience of climate education. So I will start with you, Mitzi, and thank you so much for staying up late. I know in the Philippines it's a little bit later in the day, but thank you for joining us, and please introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I am Mitzi Jonelle Tan. I'm a full-time climate justice activist based in the Philippines. I keep trying to find new ways to introduce myself because I keep getting bored of my old ways. Right now, the current version is I am a climate justice activist who is guided by the principles of anti-imperialism, decolonization, but also collective action, joy, and love, and really understanding that it is completely possible to build a better world together.
Thank you so much. And now we will go to Xiye Bastida. Could you please introduce yourself?
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here and nice to see old friends. My name is Xiye Bastida. I'm a climate justice activist from Mexico. And same thing as Mitzi, it's like our identities constantly evolve, so it's hard to say like exactly who we are at this moment. But I'm actually in university now, studying environmental studies, so I think my experience will be relevant for this topic. And I graduate in May, so I'm really excited. And same, coming in from a lot of principles, especially of indigenous philosophy. I was raised in an indigenous community in Mexico. And so I really practice a lot of the principles of reciprocity, of intergenerational collaboration, and just a deep connection with Mother Earth. And we see ourselves as defenders. So that has informed a lot of my activism and the way in which I show up to spaces. So thank you for having me, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much. And we have Pheobe Hanson from Teach for the Future. And one of the things that your organization does is teach to teachers and present lesson plans and ideas to teachers. So you're obviously in the right audience. So if you could please introduce yourself for the network.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I'm Phoebe. I have co-founded and coordinated an initiative called Teach the Teacher, which I work specifically in the UK, but we work internationally, and we bring students into their own schools to teach their own teachers about climate change. So I'm a climate activist, but I also work on education and youth empowerment, and trying to find something, as two other speakers have said, something at the intersection of that is constantly evolving and meeting us where we are globally, what we need.
Thank you so much. And we want this to be a conversation, so feel free to talk among yourselves and to come in at any time. But I'm going to start out with the first question. How would you define a pedagogy of hope, and especially in the work that you do and the movements that you are leading? What does this mean to you? And I will start out with Mitzi, as you mentioned it a little bit in your introduction.
I don't know if this answer is going to be funny, but it's a bit late, so my brain's not the sharpest. But I sometimes think of hope as like liquid cake, where sometimes we think that hope is something that's really far and distant and something that we don't know if it exists yet. And it's true that in that uncertainty also lies the hope, because you know that the future isn't set in stone. And so you know there's something you can do about it. But also in the communities that we work with, in the youth movement, with the frontline communities. I spend a lot of time with small farmers, small fisher folk, and indigenous peoples, and also the youth movement in general. And there you already get to taste the future that we're building, because it already exists in small pockets, and it's often very threatened, but it's also often very strong and has so much power in it. And so it's like I've tasted the really good cake and I just want everyone to have it. And I'm like, you guys, we all have to have this cake and we all have to have it now. And when I'm like, no, I don't know. I don't know if I can keep going. I don't know if there's something that we can keep doing. You know, and everything is just so intense and the climate impacts are so like real and so tangible. I'm like, okay, I want to give up. And then you're like, oh, but the cake is so good. I can't like get it out of my head. I'm really craving for it. I really want it right now. So I guess in a way, hope for me is like really good cake.
Well, that sounds delicious. I will now go to Xiye for your take. How would you define a pedagogy of hope in this time of climate crisis, and as we work through education and as a movement to change that?
Well, I don't have a funny answer. I have more of like an experiential answer, and I have two different things to offer. I think for me, climate education is, especially a pedagogy of hope, it's housed in two different sections for me. So one of them is the movement, and the other one is the actual classroom. And if you survey a lot of students, especially our age, you will find that most of us got our climate education through informal means, meaning that we started ourselves or we found it in our political movements. And I was recently learning about the Black Panthers and what they did to organize. And what they did was actually like every person that wanted to call themselves a Black Panther had to go through 6 weeks of political education, meaning that they had to go through intentional like reframing of history of their political views, how they saw themselves, how to organize. And how to organize, I'm taking a class right now on communication and activism, and I had kind of just been doing the organizing, but learning about histories of organizing is really inspirational because it shows you that there are so many like pasts that we can look to for inspiration for developing our tactics to being more effective and being more coalition based. And the second type of pedagogy is in the classroom. And I'm taking a class by Professor Bethany Wiggin. And if some of you are in the public environmental humanities sector, you will know about her. And she's like totally changed the way that I see education, because she thinks that a pedagogy of hope is really about four main things. One of them is it has to be solutions based. Students, we do need to learn about the climate crisis, but more than anything, we need to learn about solutions. Mitzi and I have a friend, her name, well, I don't know if she's your friend, but I assume she is. Her name is Sage, and she used to go to UC Berkeley, and she had the largest student-led class in Berkeley's history, where she had thousands and thousands of students coming into her climate solutions seminar. And that what they found is that students were depressed, they had a lot of eco-anxiety, and that a lot of their classes was only teaching them about the climate disasters, not about climate solutions. And she created this curriculum that she's now spreading as much as she can throughout the world on how do you actually teach solutions-based. And I've heard like people who have been to her class and they just love it, and they've been covered like a lot, and it's really exciting. The second thing for good pedagogy of hope is it has to be project-based. There's a big difference between us coming to class, studying for an exam, forgetting everything we ever did, versus coming to class and working towards something. So now in my public environmental humanities class, we're actually doing a publicly engaged project, meaning that we're doing a project that will engage the community, especially on how to learn about climate, how to deal with climate. And I have friends doing like full surveys for climate anxiety across my school. I am personally doing a project called How to Become an Activist, and it will basically survey youth activists from around the world to see their actual pathways to activism, so that we can try to figure out what actually makes somebody an activist so that other people can embark in that journey. And there's incredible projects like two Chinese international students are working on how to teach about the ecology of Philadelphia to fellow Chinese international students. So it's like super specific and just trying to bring everybody in. The third thing that has to be part of that pedagogy of hope is a decolonized methodology of teaching. And there's this author, her name is Linda Smith, and she's fantastic. She's from Australia. She's Aboriginal from Australia. And she just wrote this fantastic book on how do you actually decolonize methodology. And this is for older students, I would say probably like college and beyond. And then starting early is super important. And I know all of you are teachers or professors in different stages of students' careers, but really advocating for a student learning about climate or just a connection with the environment when they're super young really makes a huge difference onto how they come into college. I have classmates that have literally said to my teacher's face and to my face, like, I didn't care about the environment before this class, and just like flat out saying it. And for me, it's like unimaginable to not care about the environment because I grew up with a community that really values ecosystems. But the reality is that for a lot of people, it is an afterthought. So those are my definitions of a pedagogy of hope: solutions-based, project-based, decolonized, and early.
Thank you so much. I know that many of the teachers in this virtual room are very excited to hear your answer, and I think that as you say, doing something about what we see is also a way of learning and a way of changing the future. So Phoebe, to you, how do you see this? And also something that Xiye mentioned was eco-anxiety and all of that. So what is the role of hope in quality climate change education, and how do we combat that eco-anxiety as well?
Yeah, I mean, my immediate reflection on the basis of what Xiye and Mitzi were saying is, I think for me, hope is very different for every person, the way that they experience it, the way that they see it. The way that I experienced my education and the way that I experienced hope was quite unique, coming from the background that I came from. I'm not really a family that has done higher education before or done any of those types of things, and I'm approaching education in a very different way to my peers. And that's something that intersects with so many other identities with the people that I see in my classrooms and the classrooms that we then go into in Teach the Teacher, which seems like a really random thing to say, but I think every student has a subject that they're interested in, or a variety of subjects that they're interested in. What I don't see in education, but then also in the way that we talk about hope, is the way that it's different. I want to see education about climate change being integrated into so many other subjects, so that it doesn't take somebody taking a module on environmental change in order for them to learn about environmental change and about the future. It's also in history and English, and it's also intertwined within how they experience the world and how they get excited about their future and the way that they see it, because I think you're not going to feel hope if you're only seeing it in the forms that you've been traditionally told are activism or are environmentalism or whatever. I'm on a campus full of so many people who are amazing and who are doing so many, a variety of different topics and of different future careers. And to be honest, very few of them would look like the future that I would look at when I think I'm hopeful about the future, because I'm going to do this and I'm going to put my anxiety into action in this way. So I think hope isn't something that you can prescribe. It's meeting young people where they are, and it's meeting them in a way that can allow them to define what they mean by hope. So basically what I'm saying is it's never a question that I can answer. I can answer it for me, and it's an ongoing thing. I have moments every month, every week of, I think all three of us and probably more in this room have seen the rooms and institutions that we're supposed to place our faith in, and it really rocks your ability to maintain faith and hope in the future and the planet. So actively, continually creating that in our own lives is something that becomes incredibly, incredibly important. For me, it's an ongoing challenge, and that's the same for so many other young people in so many other ways. And circling back to your question about climate anxiety, I think that's what's most crucial. Is it's not really climate anxiety on either of those things. It's not just climate change, it's also the cost of living crisis. It's also like immediate threats to livelihood. It's so many other things. it's not just climate change, it's not just these things, it's also that my parents were able to place their faith to a certain extent in institutions, and I can't share that same faith. It's also very fundamental and very much not just climate change. It's a variety of things. And it's not just anxiety, it's also despair. It's also so many other forms of horrible emotions, but also of positive emotions. So much nuance and so much difficulty. And that's what makes your job hard, I think, as educators, is that there are so many different ways of experiencing the world today. At Teach the Teacher, what we're trying to do is giving young people that knowledge through teachers that have science-based understanding, that kind of more comprehensive understanding of what climate change is, so they can facilitate conversations that go across all of these different working areas. And that's something that we found really helpful in being able to actively create hope in young people's lives.
Thank you so much, Phoebe. And, as you were saying, this is why, at the beginning of this meeting, we talked about, the high level panel on the teaching profession. And if you read, and we will share this later, a little bit more of our manifesto, what we are proposing for climate education is climate transformation. It's not just, one class that you have here that has limited subjects, but it's also a whole way of teaching, of approaching education, of working, for change, and the conditions of students, the conditions of teachers and support personnel as well. So what you have touched on really, really resonates with our campaign. And one of the questions that we also want to ask you, and this builds on something that Xiye said, is about why do we need to decolonize education to foster this kind of pedagogy that is of hope, it's of liberation, but it's also of transformation. It's also, when you have Teach the Teacher, it's also about students working with teachers. It's not this kind of hierarchical relationship. But I'm wondering what, Mitzi, if you could react a little bit to that, and then, Xiye, also, what do you think about, about decolonizing the role of education and how that is so important for this pedagogy of hope?
I think it's incredibly important because you won't really be able to you won't have the pedagogy of hope without decolonization, because then you won't actually be giving hope and teaching hope. To have a concrete example, when I was learning about the climate crisis when I was growing up, it was very foreign and technical and alienating and very westernized. It didn't talk about what we were already experiencing in the Philippines. And then it didn't talk about that what we were experiencing wasn't something that was normal. If it was talked about that, this is something we experience as a country, it's just something that we naturally have. We're just a country that will naturally have all these typhoons, and it might get worse, but that's that's because of God. And there's a Catholic upbringing also in the Philippines, so that plays a part into it. And so there you see that young people aren't given the chance to see that there's a problem, see that there's something that they can do about it, and see that it is completely possible to have hope. Instead, we're told to just swallow it like a pill. And so without the decolonization, you don't have the actual solutions, because to address the climate crisis is to decolonize, because the climate crisis started when there was an imbalance with our relationship with nature, which was what happened when the colonizers first came in. And so we need to have that decolonization, and it has to start really young, because I was also taught some misinformation as a kid. So my teacher also said that smoking caused the climate crisis, which isn't true. Because I had lung problems and I had health problems, and I knew smoking was bad for me. I took that upon me, and I started going to people who I saw smoking and saying, hey, this is bad for you and the planet and global warming, carbon dioxide, and I went on this whole spiel. And it really just shows you that when you give young people actionable and direct ways to talk to people, and they see how they can participate, they will participate. If they see how it affects them, they will come in. And so it really starts with that actionable thing, and it really starts with also giving them that appreciation early on. And to decolonize is really to rebalance that relationship and to have us feel like we're part of this ecosystem.
Thank you so much. And maybe Chia, do you want to build on what Mitzi has been saying?
Yeah, I think I also have two different perspectives on this. One of them is a movement perspective, and the other one is a classroom one. And Mitzi will agree with me that when the pandemic happened, the youth climate movement had a huge moment of introspection about kind of assessing who we were as a global movement, because the experience for us had been that in the climate conferences and in the platforms that were given to activists, it would usually be the European activists that were centered and highlighted. And Mitzi coming from the Philippines, me coming from Mexico, I am and I was living in the United States, so that already entirely changed the dynamics. Just where you were living already gave you a huge access into media, and being able to speak at the UN or even strike outside the UN was kind of a privilege rather than having to strike in a global South country where it would be dangerous for you to do so. So because we had this pause where we were organizing global strike after global strike, just kind of doing everything we could to put the climate crisis into every single front page and also show that youth cared, we didn't have too much of that self-analyzing. And then when the pandemic happened, many things happened. For example, Fridays for Future came out with an arm for MAPA, which is most affected peoples and areas, and Mitzi can talk more about it, but Mitzi was one of the people who spearheaded that, because, and I don't want to put words in her mouth, but the the analysis behind it was, we have to also be able to center frontline communities from most affected areas to have a platform to speak about the climate crisis. And I think that the movement was able to kind of self-educate into decolonization. What does it mean to not center white voices? What does it mean to not center only European voices in an issue that is global and is affecting people that were the victims of that colonization? And Angela Davis defines radical as something that you grasp from the roots. So that's why decolonization is sometimes called radical, because we're trying to really look at the root of the issue, which is that colonization, is that imperialism, and also the forced assimilation of many of our cultures into a Western philosophy. And our cultures are about living with the earth. In my language, the word for earth is the same as the word for our skin. The word for the outer layer of the earth is the same as the word for our skin, meaning that when you hurt the earth, you hurt yourself. And just in language, you can see how powerful that connection is from people and the earth. And that is the Otomi language from Mexico. And so in the movement, having constant assessments of how we show up, what we do, and even the type of organizing that we had, like Fridays for Future was decentralized, or we tried to at least make it that as a principle. And I have a nonprofit, it's called Re-Earth Initiative. And the full concept behind Re-Earth Initiative is to say, recycling, reusing, reducing, like that was something of 50 years ago that hasn't worked. Why hasn't it worked? Because look at where we are right now. What we need to do is reimagine, reconnect, rethink, re-earth. So we really want to bring in a transformative type of even activism and institutions that were truly able to change the way that the system has been operating. And when you look at finances, it's super clear how this disconnect is. For example, in the United States, out of 100% of philanthropic dollars, 2% go to environmental organizations and 0.76% go to youth-led climate organizations. Less than 1% goes to indigenous communities, and a fourth of that actually makes it to the ground. So when you look at even the distribution of wealth in social movements, it is so unequal. We don't even get like a grain of sand in the big span of things. And I don't want to keep taking too long, but in terms of the classroom, actually we can say that answer for next, so because I don't want to not hear Phoebe, but yeah, that's like how we can decolonize the movement. And then in the classroom is about just being super intentional. There's a reading that really changed the way that I saw things. It's called Educating for the Anthropocene by Peter Sutoris. So you might want to check that one out.
Thank you so much. And hopefully, maybe we should do a separate list with all the book recommendations and authors and people that we should read and follow. Um, and Phoebe, as we turn to you, I know that this has also been part of your work, but what do you think are some concrete steps that should be taken by governments to start transforming classrooms, transforming schools into sites for a pedagogy of hope? What are your recommendations as we now are working together with teachers and education support personnel? What are some of the concrete steps that you think governments should take?
Yeah, in the UK, my organisation worked with the UK has the devolved education system, so it's a little bit complicated. But we worked with the English Department for Education to develop their first climate strategy. And I say that with hesitation because they didn't actually do a lot of the actual climate bit. Like they did a lot of like extracurricular work and a lot of like retrofitting school buildings, though to be honest, not enough of that either. But there was literally nothing bar a tiny bit about primary school science curriculums, and even then still segregating climate change just into the science, just into like science and geography and those kinds of subjects. There was very little actually on what we learn in the curriculum and education and learning. It was a real blind spot that we missed. And what was also missed, and the reason that Teach the Teacher became a thing that we were doing, was because there was no teacher training, or the commitments to teacher training were kind of passed along many years down the line. Something that was kind of mentioned as a perhaps, but not a like definite, and there's no concrete plans there. That's what is needed, is beyond the newspaper headlines that governments can get from saying we have a climate strategy now, look at us, we're the Department for Education. Beyond that, what are they actually doing concretely? Because that is what is completely missed. And I would imagine it's very similar in other countries around the world. I think specifically in the UK, what we would need is, we've got some drive now for curriculum change and we need to act on it. We're going to have a general election this year or maybe next year. So we have a new government that can then be capitalized upon, no matter what party they are, to be able to confront that challenge of climate change and education. I would personally want for them to appoint an independent expert to conduct a review of the entire education system and the places in which climate change could be put into different subjects. I think having that kind of independent, objective view is something that's really, really important, something that we've tried to replicate as youth groups. But I think for governments, having that done is something that they can then commission and feel confidence in by themselves is something so, so incredibly important. But I also want to see student leadership as something that governments prioritize. I mean, you can see from all of us, this student leadership has completely changed our lives, being young people that are actively doing things on climate change and actively doing things in the world. It's opened up my worldview beyond imagination. Something the UK does particularly poorly is educating about our place in the world, to the extent that I pretty much had no idea about my region is the Black Country in the UK, which is so called because of all of the factories and the soot and everything that we had. We were the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution. And I had no idea the links that would then have to climate change, or indeed everything about the British colonial past and present. We were taught literally nothing in our schools. And that is what is incredibly important, is how can we put climate change into all of these different curriculums, but also what are we currently teaching and where is it falling short? Where are the gaps being filled? Because I was taught about Henry VIII about 5 times in school, but not about the colonial past that my country has, and it's present in many countries, and the impacts that it's had. Yeah, that's what I'd be saying.
Thank you so much, Phoebe. And Mitzi, the same question to you. If if you could recommend some concrete steps for the government of Philippines to transform classrooms into sites of pedagogy of hope, what would you recommend? What do you think are some concrete steps that the government should take?
I think there are 2 things. So there's the institutional, like the structure, and then the curriculum. So I'll go into the structure first because it's something that we don't talk about as much. And what I mean by structure is like the actual physical schools. So here in the Philippines, we don't have evacuation centers for typhoons and floods. So when there are typhoons and floods, the schools are used as evacuation centers, also churches and gyms, etc. But mostly it's schools because they're the ones that are more common. But that means when the typhoon is gone and the houses have been destroyed and it's been weeks, students still can't go back to school because it's still being used as an evacuation site. Even once they've gone back home, the evacuation site is now, still like in ruins, and that has to be fixed and addressed. And so you really see that already affects children's education, and that has climate into it. Earlier, you were mentioning how classes have been suspended because of the heat here in the Philippines. But the thing is that is true, and it is because of the climate crisis and the heat waves, but also understanding that we've always had our summer in April to May. And years ago, like maybe like 2013, our summer was in April and May, and we didn't have class during this time because this was summer. But to be in line with the US and with Europe and with globalization, we shifted our academic calendar so that it would then start in August also instead of June. And then we now have summer when the global north had summer, just because we want to be in line with their educational systems, et cetera, but that doesn't make any sense for our climate. And so there you immediately see, and a lot of teachers were already saying something against it. So the first thing is really for the governments to listen to the teachers. Like the schools aren't built to be in that heat, and it's getting hotter. And so you already see that they're creating policies that aren't actually based on climate and education. And then when we go into curriculum, then it's really about ensuring that it's contextualized and empowering, and it's going to look different in every region of the Philippines also, because we're such a diverse region, and that has to be something that we need to figure out. It also has to get faster. There's so much like red tape and bureaucracy. I've been talking to, we were having, our organization here was having conversations with some regional departments of the Department of Education, because if we talk to the national department, it just gets stuck. It gets a lot faster with the regional departments, but that just means we have a lot of regions. That just means that it's a very slow process. And then when we had an administration change, then everyone was changed again, and we had to start from zero. And there is a climate curriculum that's being approved, but it was there since 2012, and a lot has happened in the climate world since 2012. So you have to be ever adapting also. What's interesting is in your conversation with Phoebe and what you were talking about earlier about how to integrate climate in every subject. I've actually seen it happen in some schools here, but because they had storm surges and a lot of the coastal community, a lot of their buildings were destroyed. They now have very limited buildings for all their students. And so they have to cut classes short and merge them together. And so they started putting climate into every single subject. And they said that, once they have their buildings back up, they're just going to keep that because they saw and they realized just how much more empowering it is to the young people who were directly experiencing the climate crisis already. And they saw that, this gave them hope because they were they didn't know what to do. They didn't know what if they could do anything. And then this education, this information made them realize that what we're feeling, this fear, it is normal. It's something that we're supposed to be afraid of because it isn't something that the climate crisis isn't something that should be happening to us. It's not something that we just need to accept. And so we can be afraid and we can do something about it. And I think that's really powerful for a lot of young people. And that's what governments need to do, really. It's ensuring that the curriculum is contextualized. It's to our experience, it's empowering, but it's also ensuring that teachers teach in the classroom, but also bring their students out of the classroom. So what we do in our organization is we bring a lot of our students to frontline communities to learn from the communities and live with them and learn firsthand of what's happening on our farms, in our coastal communities, in our worker unions, in our urban poor communities. And there you see really what the climate crisis looks like on every different level and every different experience. And a lot of teachers are starting now doing incentives for them to join us, and then they have to do a reflection on that, and then they get incentivized with that class. And I think that's something that really shows that education doesn't have to be stuck inside the classroom, and it really can't be, and it has to be supplemented and enriched, that word, make it richer by having education that's outside of the classroom as well.
Thank you so much, Mitzi, and to all of all of you participating. We are about to open it for questions so that you can talk to these amazing students. And Xiye, as we kind of head it over, what would you say is your message to your teachers? Many of those who are online today have been working for many decades. I remember some talking about, you know, being part of the kind of anti-nuclear protest many years ago, and how they have also transformed their teaching and their approach. But what would be your message to teachers around, if there's something that you want them to know or keep in mind, as they are also struggling with many of the same issues?
Well, that's a really hard question because I'm used to learning from teachers, always being inspired and shown how to do different things. And I am sure every single student and even every single teacher that just had teachers before remembers that moment of like Eureka, when you would understand the math problem, or you would understand the way that the verbs worked, or whatever it was. You just have this moment of huge like a relief that you understand something. And I think that's what climate education should be like for teachers, just that it has to click that this is the new world. This is the way that students are being brought up. This is the way that the world is. It's a world in crisis, and we need to prepare students for a world in crisis. And the best way to prepare students for a world in crisis is to make them solution makers and solution builders, and also critical thinkers, and just people that can see this world as not only a place where injustice has happened, but also as the groundwork for building better. And that's why I call myself an architect of the future in a way. And I think that's what the movement is, because what we really are doing is not thinking that the climate crisis is just a coming apocalypse, but that our communities already suffered and already suffered apocalypses. And we are resilient. And part of that resiliency is building better and building stronger and building more justly. And so I would just invite teachers to really, and if you're here, you probably already see yourself in that way, but really like double down on the importance that you have on your students' lives. And you know, we can all say this, we have teachers that change our lives, teachers that change the way we saw the world. And also leaning into other teachers, like nature is a teacher, traditional ecological knowledge exists out there, different worldviews exist out there. So I would just say to embrace those worldviews so that we can build a new generation of learners and thinkers and builders.
That is wonderful. I like the architects of the future. If you're our future, I think we're in great hands. And Phoebe, also to you, and you have worked with teachers, you have done, you know, teach as well in the classroom, in a way, becoming a teacher yourself. What is your message to teachers?
It's complicated. I'm the daughter of a teacher, which is how I got into all of this work. And I think specifically in the UK, but also beyond, teachers are really overwhelmed. And I'm so glad that all of you have made the time to be here. I'm so grateful that you've made the time to be here and to do this work. So it's difficult for me to put all of these expectations and all of these wishes and all of these like really incredible things on your shoulders, because I'm aware of what it's like to be a teacher right now, although I haven't experienced it directly myself. So I guess that my advice, my thoughts would be, look after yourself first and foremost, and make sure that you're there and ready to be able to give to your students and to be able to prepare them for the world that they're going to grow up in, because I think they won't be able to feel that hope if you're not feeling that hope. So I think investing in yourself first is something that's incredibly important. But beyond that, I think listening to your students is something that's really often missed. Our education system and many others are very prescriptive. They're very set in very rigid curriculums and textbooks, and that's great, and there's a place for that. But I think there's also a place when conversations like this are happening for kind of like personalized learning, where you can allow that student to lead their education themselves and understand exactly what their future might look like, and then how climate change and social change and how hope about the world can fit into that. Because that's never really something that you can plan for or prep for in any kind of way. Yeah, that would be what I'd say.
Thank you so much, Phoebe. That is amazing. And being a feminized profession, I think taking care of yourself is something that we often find very, very hard to do. So, thank you for those words that I think are going to be inspirational to many of our members who are listening. And just right before we open it, Mitzi, is there something that you would like to say to your teachers?
I think to add to what Xiye and Phoebe have already said, it's just to realize that to teach the climate crisis has to go hand in hand with teaching about hope and solutions, because otherwise you're not really teaching something that's very effective. You just fill people with despair. You fill your younger students. I can imagine why it's such a hard topic to go into, because it's like, if I teach this, how will their mental health can they handle it as younger people? But understanding that they can handle it, and you can help them handle it by ensuring that you fill it up with hope. And so that means that you can teach about it in an exciting way, in a fun way. We have the opportunity to build a better world, as Xiye was saying, that there is so much injustice that's already happening today, not just with climate, but like with class, with gender, with ableism, with race, with wars that are happening, with genocides that are happening across the world. There's so much injustice, and they're all so interconnected with each other. And now you have the amazing opportunity to teach the next generation that they can do better and they can build better, but not in like a you're the answer and you're the heroes of the future, the way that was put on us as a youth climate movement, which is very pressuring, but in more of showing the victories of the past, as she was saying. And I'm reading this book called Hope in the Dark by Rebecca Solnit, and it also talks about this, where we have to remember that the victories that have already happened, and teaching that it is possible to change the world, and the world is constantly changing, and that the climate crisis is one of our really, really huge and horrible and big like problems, but it is a problem that we can overcome together. I think showing that like excitement from yourself also, so a little bit of it is you really also believing in it, that you are able to also create a better world with us. And I think that is so important. And really just, again, I can't remove the fact that we have to make it fun and exciting when you're teaching this to younger students, especially, because otherwise you just leave people into grief and despair, and it just brings people down.